People's Station for over 70 years. 1350 AM, 104.7 FM, WLOU Louisville. The original soul of Louisville. Online at WLOUFM.com.
104.7
What did I want to be when I grew up? Well, as early as I can remember, I always wanted to be a lawyer. There was something appealing about fighting for the rights of the little guy and making sure that justice was served. But I was dissuaded from that dream by a Batman comic of all things. So I was reading the early years of The Dark Knight when he was in training. There was one sequence in particular that kind of cinched it for me. He was in law school, and the professor was talking about a crime and the punishment for the criminal that got convicted of that crime. And a young Bruce Wayne ended up asking the professor, well, was that justice? And the professor said, no, but it's the law. So when I learned that there was an actual difference between justice and the law, that kind of turned me off to being a lawyer. Not that there's anything wrong with that particular profession. In fact, I've got a sister who's a brilliant attorney, and I know quite a few of them. How I got into radio is kind of a weird story. I was in high school, and the school I went to had a vocational program for different occupations. And it was a friend of mine named Nina Ware who convinced me that I needed to try out for this radio station. We broadcast through the campus during the lunch hours and everything. So I took this mass communications class, and I opted to be the news guy, the campus news guy for the radio station. So I would go around gathering news on an old-fashioned, old-school tape recorder and, putting stories together like that. But one of the personalities that was supposed to do a shift during lunch couldn't make it. So the instructor wanted me to do it because we were all trained on all aspects of running the programming side of radio. So I had my first taste of being on the air, as it were, during a lunchtime. And for me, that was it. Now, my actual entree into the business came several months later when a bunch of us from that class were commissioned to cut commercials for vocational education at a local radio station. So each of us went in, I think there were like 5 or 6 of us. We took a few minutes, scripted the commercials, and went in and produced them. So I was the last one to produce mine, and it, relatively easy. We had the production staff there to help us with anything that we needed. So they would play the commercials as soon as we would produce them, so that gave us a chance to call our folks at home. Hey, Mom, I'm going to be on the radio. So the general manager of the station happened to hear my commercial and reached out to me through a friend of mine that had become a mentor. And, we had an interview. He offered me a part-time job. And so I'm a senior in high school, working weekends on a 100,000-watt radio station in Columbus, Georgia, with the promise of that job becoming full-time as long as I kept my grades up. So when I graduated high school, took a couple of weeks off, and I had my first full-time job in radio. That was just over 40 years ago. What I like most about this business is something that was drummed into me by an early mentor. We are granted a license to serve the public trust. And what that means is that, especially for Black radio, we are the conduits of information. We are the ones that will provide you with what you need to know. I love being on the air for the few hours that I'm on. I love the interaction with those of you that listen. I love talking with you on the streets. But if I'm to be completely honest, the one thing that I love the most about being in this business is the actual side that you don't see. In my position as a program director, ultimately, I'm responsible for what it is that you hear on the air. And what I love is coming up with the strategies along with the other departments of a radio station to make that presentation. Everything from who it is that you hear, what time you hear them, the music that we play, some of the promotions that we do. I love that side of it. I love the competition against other radio stations. I come from a rock background, which was extremely competitive. We engaged in a lot of guerrilla warfare and did some things that these days would be very much frowned upon, but it's the competition of this business that drives me the most. But again, when it comes back down to it, you being the listener are the most important element, and that's what drives me to continue to have a love for this business. Any hobbies or hidden talents that people don't know about? One of my biggest hobbies is collecting vintage animation. I've been into comic books and things like that since I was a kid, and vintage animation has always been something that I've loved. I go back as far as the old Max Fleischer cartoons from the 1930s and 40s. I have a collection of the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons. Those were all drawn by hand, and they took months to do maybe a 5 or 10 minute feature. And the way that they look, it's you have to see one to believe it. It's such a beautiful thing to look at when you're actually watching it. The other hobby I have is I am a podcaster. I have a podcast that I've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years. It's called Gunshots, Straight from the Hip. We tackle political issues, social issues, a lot of slice of life stuff. It's a chance for me to express the side of myself that I don't get to do on the air on a regular basis because it's unfiltered and sometimes it's controversial. I love doing it. You can find it on my social media page and on my website at markgunmedia.com. The other hobby is I am a huge martial arts enthusiast. The 70s era blaxploitation movie genre, Black Belt Jones, Fred Williamson, Isaac Hayes, Bruce Lee, that whole era of martial arts film was the end-all be-all for me. I got seriously into martial arts in the late 70s. My first instructor, Sensei Jack Swift, who was my karate instructor. And I've gone on to study other forms of martial arts, my favorite being, well, actually two. Jeet Kune Do, which was the style that Master Bruce Lee pioneered. And there's also a fighting method that became popular in movies called KFM, the Casey Fighting Method. And if you Google those, you'll see the way I describe them. KFM is what I like to call beautiful brutality. I could go on and on about this, but I won't. So I know there's time that's limited on this video. So yeah, those are my hobbies. Wow. Because I am a second generation musician, thanks, Dad, I have an interest in many genres of music. So if I had to pick 5, the first one would definitely be the Chicago Transit Authority one from 1969. That was the rock group Chicago's very first album. Songs in the Key of Life from Stevie Wonder in 1976. That is near and dear to my heart because it was an album that I got for Christmas back then. And the music is so varied and diverse, and knowing Stevie's work ethic and the time that he takes to put in an album, the music is just classic. Earth, Wind & Fire's I Am from 1979. Even though I've been listening to Earth, Wind & Fire for years, this was the intersection of me being in radio for my second year and me being into music and the production side of music. Maurice White has always been a mentor for me. And that album, I Am, represents a watershed moment in the way that they did things and the way that I actually listened to music. Number 4, anything really by BB and CeCe Winans. I can't remember the name of the album, but it featured one of their first secular hits, Heaven. And that album is also special to me because I was able to strike up a friendship with BB. There was a song on that album, one of my all-time favorite gospel songs. It's called I Want to Be More. And I actually asked him if he would grant me permission to actually record that, to do a cover of that song someday. One of the most beautiful melodies that I'd ever heard, and BB's voice, just such conviction with the way that he sings it. So that's number 4. Number 5 would have to be by the rock group Toto, and it's a live album called Falling in Between. I've had a special relationship with that band and lead guitarist Steve Lukather ever since 1978 when they debuted. Throughout my time in radio and throughout my travels, I've been able to work in various markets all over the country, Los Angeles being one of them, and that's where I ran into a lot of musicians and I spent a lot of time in recording studios. Steve Lukather has always been one of the coolest, nicest, and best musicians on the planet. The group in and of itself is something that you have to see live. One of my bucket list groups to see. That particular album, Falling in Between, represents decades of an evolution of their sound and just an energy that you don't get from a lot of groups that perform live. So those would be my 5 on a long road trip. Mine is a quote from Mike Tyson, and it sums up the way that I approach my professional career as a strategist. That quote is, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the mouth. So it questions, how do you handle the unknown? How do you handle the unexpected? How do you adapt? What do you do? Do you remain calm or do you lose your cool? When you do this type of job or any type of job where you have to plot a strategy, you have to think about things like that. So that quote has always stuck with me.
The People Station for over 70 years. 1350 AM, 104.7 FM, WLOU Louisville. The original soul of Louisville. Online at WLOUFM.com.